Today we're talking all things Superman, and more importantly, can James Gunn's Superman movie save the DCCU? This is I Have No Title and I Must Podcast, the show where we discuss any and all aspects of pop culture. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris.
And now, admittedly, I am not the biggest Superman fan, so this is going to be a lot on you.
Well, I've gone in and out of favor with Superman, and I know that sounded like I worded it improperly. Sometimes he chooses not to like me.
I've always been more of a Flash and Green Lantern when I do dip into DC.
Green Lantern, I think, has a really great history, and that's one I'm really interested in, which they're opening in the new Superman. Not to jump the gun by a mile, but they're starting with Guy Gardner in this, which I think is probably a pretty good idea. I think it probably would have been a better idea to start with Jon Stewart and then jump to Hal Jordan, but we'll see. Nathan Fillion's really good. It looks like the look is weird for him, but that's on purpose because they're all dressed the same, those other guys, but we will get to that. Who'd you say, Green Lantern, The Flash?
Yeah.
Flash has a pretty cool history too. But today we're going to talk about the Man of Tomorrow and then maybe some of his interactions with other superheroes. So just to start off with, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster, right? Two guys, one an artist, one a comic book writer. Well, not a comic book writer yet, but just a writer. Would team up in 1933 and write a short story called Reign of the Superman, where a bald, homeless man gains telepathic abilities and gets hell-bent on taking over the world. He would then lose those abilities as easily as he got them, returning him to the breadline from whence he came. It was a few years later they decided to return to this concept, but flip the whole thing and make his powers physical instead of mental, and also make him a force for good. They used strongman iconography from the day. It's what a lot of athletic gear looked like. Strongmen from the circus or sideshows and what have you. It was a common look and became an extremely common look for comic book heroes and villains. I think the Phantom predates Superman by a couple years. So I think that was maybe the one that set the standard. And there's a lot of other comic book heroes that predate Superman.
Yeah.
Most of which just wore like a trench coat.
But would they be considered true superheroes or just...
Yeah, no, and not necessarily. Just like the pulp detectives or vigilantes. It was to have... And even Superman didn't have like the superpowers initially that we would come to associate him with now.
So now that's why they have can leap over buildings, because it's that's jumping and
those famous phrases, the leap over tall buildings in a single bound, is because that's all he could do. Is he could actually do that. It was like it was more like a compressed version of the Hulk. And a lot of this, I don't want to like spend a whole lot of time on this because there's so many videos that talk about just the history or just that era of Superman, and they're gonna do it with more detail than I could, and you can find any of those easily. There's like real documentaries. One comes out about every 10 years, and I think they are all on YouTube if you wanna watch any of those about the evolution or history of Superman. For some reason, a lot of modern allegories twist him to Jesus, but his story is that of Moses. Initially, if you know it, and his creators were Jewish, so that makes more sense to me. They did borrow like the dual identity of Zorro. There was a lot that went into Superman to like a pastiche of a character, like everything that came before him: Hercules, Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, and from the concept of like going to another planet and having superpowers just by being in a different atmosphere, air, sunlight, what have you. So he had those trunks that people can't seem to get over. This is what I want my through line to be. And I know that it's going to be, this is a weird thing to pick, but because people would just call it underwear on the outside. That's what they called it when I grew up. And I did not know this until I was watching a video about, God, I think it was close to 10 years ago. Scott Nicewander from NerdSync would do these really short videos. He has a great channel. All of his stuff is really good, except for when he gets depressed. Skip those episodes. Give him a like, though. Like and subscribe at NerdSync. But he would talk about like the history of certain elements, like the cape, trunks, a mask, whatever kind of mask, like a domino mask, things like that. And I think at one point they even designed from a fan poll, like the perfect comic book costume, which in like how they just did it by bits and pieces was atrocious, but whatever. Anyway, so I never did this amount of research onto it, and somehow this information evaded me, even though I thought of myself as a pretty big comic book fan. They're called trunks when they're on the outside, even if it most of the time looks like a Speedo, which is why it's important to get it just right. So, originally, Superman, Clark Kent, was based on the look and feel of a strongman and did not have those like crazy abilities that he would come to have later. Do you remember your first impression of Superman, like your first memory of Superman?
Yeah. At first it was the Dennyverse with those Superman cartoons, and then that N64 game where it's like, oh, you get to play as Superman.
I do remember that.
And then all it is flying through rings in a time limit. Then what do you get to do in second level? The same thing all again.
And as I remember, that little oddly shaped toggle joystick was insanely difficult to move him around with and like control him.
The only saving grace with that is I rented it for a weekend instead of buying it. But what a weekend.
I feel like I'm a bit older than you. My dad probably got me the Superpowers action figures. I remember having those, and I don't remember. I mean, I remember asking if his cape is what made him be able to fly, if it gave him his abilities. And my dad was like, no, he can fly without it. He just kind of, can. And then I saw Christopher Reeves as Superman and watched those movies so many times. And I remember when the last one came out, and it was awful, but, I watched it, and then again on TV. And Christopher Reeves was, for the longest time, my concept of Superman. There was a Superboy show in the 90s, and I would watch it some. It wasn't, it was made for TV. It wasn't great. And then Lois and Clark came later. And that was like a lot of, when it's on TV, it's easily accessible, and you actually get to see it. I also watched the Fleischer cartoons from like the 40s.
Yeah. The Super Friends.
Before that, when it was everything looks kind of like chalky or pastel, and I know that's going to sound weird, but that's kind of the lines everything's really sharp. That's going to make it sound weird. That's an odd analogy to make, or a bad descriptor. But I think the people who know what I'm talking about, and they will have seen it, like, he fought robots and mad scientists, and the animation was actually incredibly detailed in how they animated. They like did not skip frames, but it wasn't anything like the modern, like, actually there was pretty good pacing in that. I don't know, there was just something weird about it that my child brain did not like. So anyway, eventually, like, Superman being on the radio, which I've never heard or what. I also watched George Reeves. Sorry, just one more about that, because I did see George Reeves' show quite a bit. When I was a kid, there was a lot of shows like from the 50s and 60s shown on television in the middle of the day. I don't know who was watching them. I guess old people. But in the summer, that's where I watched The Munsters, Addams Family, My Three Sons, Andy Griffith, what have you, and also Superman was on during that time. And he really, he had like, I think the body type that they imagined when they created him, like bulky big guy, like 1950s bodybuilder, which oddly enough is not how we would come to think of him now, but like, because you think of him like a tank, like ripped and shredded and huge at the same time. But Alfred Molina, who played Doc Ock, said like that was the body type he was going for when he originally played Doc Ock. So it's just weird to think, like, in 80 years, give or take, that's how Superman, like, the body of Superman would be, like, how we would come to think of Doc Ock now. But anyway. So a lot of people think Superman's really boring. And I can understand that if you don't know the character, or taking the time to understand the character. And here's the thing, even with that, some of the stories are bad. There's only so much you can do. It's in how you look at how the character looks at us. It has to be kind of an analysis of that. Like, how does a god react to humanity? I think we can get to this a bit later, but given that, I think Zack Snyder got the character wrong. I think he got a lot of things wrong in the movie, wanting to deconstruct everything and rebuild it from the ground up. But I think one of the things he got wrong is just the character on a basic level. Zack Snyder's a huge fan of Alan Moore. Me too. I love Watchmen. Every 5 or 6 years, I go through a Watchmen phase. And fortunately, nobody's done milking it. So I get something new from Watchmen. Every 5 or 6 years, we're getting something new from Watchmen now. I don't know when it comes out, but when it does, I'll watch it, and that will satiate my Watchmen craving, and I will move on from it. But that was a deconstruction of these characters.
Yeah. 'Cause I feel like he also maybe borrowed from Nolan with his Batman.
Yeah.
Because I think they took the wrong lesson from that.
Yes.
Because the reason Nolan's Batman worked is because we were coming off of Schumacher's over-the-top crazy Batman. So taking it back down to a more human level with Batman worked. But that's not the character of Superman.
Right. And given that it lent itself to what Batman is at his core. Like, Nolan had still a fundamental understanding of that. Like, taking a dark character and making him darker. He has to put him in no-win situations, which I guess is oftentimes what a superhero is faced with. Like, do you save the people on a train, or do you save Mary Jane falling off a bridge? It's a no-win situation. What do you do? With Superman, it's like, again, do you save a bunch of, like, the world or just Lois? And, that was, I think, what it comes down to in, was it The Dark Knight, when he's got to pick one of the two, and he, like, the Joker kind of tricks him.
It's like, whether you're saving Rachel or Two-Face.
Yeah.
Or Harvey.
And then which he does not create Two-Face. It's just like bad luck. You drop a guy in some gas. Well, no, he knocked himself over into the gasoline. So he created himself. Or maybe it was the Joker. Who knows? There's one scene in Man of Steel that really, like, solidifies that character to me. It's nothing at the end, and it's just a moment with Clark where, like, some trucker pisses him off, and then you don't see him do it, but then you see the guy's truck afterward, and he's like totally destroyed it, and it's all like twisted and mangled and like impaled and stuff. And like, well, you would have heard that like within 50 miles, but B, there's no evolution that would include that of Clark Kent and Superman and Kal-El. I don't, like, in my purview and understanding of the history of the character, like, it's a pure, like, there are psychopaths in the world, and they have something wrong with them. Psychopaths, narcissists, sociopaths. And they can lie with impunity. They do bad things and feel no remorse. Superman is the opposite of that. He is meant to be this paragon of good. And it's not just that he was born like that. it's that he was raised like that by these really pure good people that gave him, aside from him just wanting to do good on an internal basis, like that's nature versus nurture. He had both. He was already good inside, and then he has these amazing parents who just teach him to be the best person he can be, which I think Kevin Costner did. There were some good things in that movie. I'm not saying I hate the movie and he got everything wrong, but that moment there, I was like, it just feels like, well, okay. And then he becomes Superman, but he's this dark, depressed version of Superman that struggles with his, I don't know, like, fame and people looking at him as some sort of messiah figure, like the savior of us all. And whereas, like, Grant Morrison's view on Superman is he's just this guy who would look over his shoulder at you and smile because he's on top of the world. He feels good to do good, and he knows that he's doing, like, if he can't save everybody, he tries to let it roll off because of how good it makes him feel to save the people he did. And that's what he chooses to focus on. Grant Morrison, I think, had the quintessential best view of Superman and how he should be. And all the characters, really. His run on All-Star Superman, which I think ran for like 2.5 years, 3 years, something like that. Well worth a read. There was an animated movie based on it, but it is highly truncated down. I'd recommend the story over... If I'm going to recommend like one Superman story, it's going to be All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison. Anytime Grant Morrison writes for a character, it's going to be an interesting take, even if it's not your favorite one. Yeah, I think it's worth a read. So, you said you're not that big a fan of Superman in general. What keeps you from being that? What was your, like, another character overshadowed Superman in some way by an interesting level or an interest level?
One, I tend to gravitate more towards Marvel than DC as a whole anyway. But again, there's a lot more nuanced characters than Superman. And so I kind of like that back and forth with those characters. Because Superman's usually the ultimate symbol of good. Where everybody else, there's a little bit more wiggle room to them. Because like with Green Lantern, you got Hal Jordan. Highly capable, highly skilled, but he's also very arrogant, and that gets in the way. And
an alcoholic, right? Or at one point, he was an alcoholic.
And then, like, he goes crazy and becomes Parallax, but...
Yeah, which that remained, like, they left him dead for a while, and then he became a version of the Spectre.
Yeah.
They did some crazy stuff with him, actually.
And, same thing with, like, Green Arrow and stuff like that. He's just a guy. He's like Batman, but, like...
With a bow and arrow.
Yeah. And then...
And he's green.
You've got the things with his sidekicks and stuff, and Speedy and the drug addiction. And so, I always kind of gravitated to those characters more. Because with Superman, it almost seemed... Not that he was completely unbeatable, but less wiggle room for that. So it's like you had to go bigger to be bigger than Superman. And so how does that work when you integrate him into other teams?
Right.
And I know even with like the Justice League animated series, they were talking about it, that they had to tone down Superman and Martian Manhunter, or else it would just be Superman and Martian Manhunter beat up the bad guys.
Yeah, that's always like in the 70s when they just gave him whatever powers they needed or wanted really for him to have that day. Like he can just throw out his hand and a miniature version of himself flies out of his hand. What the f***? So, yeah, comics were crazy back then. Or, like, how Doctor Strange basically just became too powerful and they stopped printing his comics because what was the point? Yeah. Here's my thing with that is you're right. Like, every bit of that is right. But I think he still needs to exist.
Oh, yeah.
To be that, because if you didn't have this character, these characters, it would just be... How extreme can we go? And then it would just be an edge fest like the 90s were. Like, how many pouches can we fit on Cable's body? Can he have an armpit pouch? And can a codpiece count as a pouch? So there were two major things that happened in the 90s. And this is when I really started reading, like, Superman Weekly, was when he dropped out of the comics. I know that sounds weird, but they killed him, in quotes. And I found out about this and I was like, well, it probably isn't the case, but, you know, I was still pretty young and dumb, so I thought maybe they are. So my first real exposure to Superman was reading the weekly comics. He had 4 comics at the time, and they were weekly, and they were 4 different very old comic lines that they had synced up to run like once a month, but in succession would make it a weekly comic. And they would pick up stories but also have their own individual stories. So each of those, once they killed Superman, they kind of rebooted them, but not really, because they still had the same number in line, and there were 4 new Supermen, each with their own storylines, and then the books really became isolated unto themselves going week to week. There were 2 guys that from the onset you knew were not Superman. There was a guy named John Henry Steele, created basically an Iron Man suit, and there was Superboy Superman, who was a clone of Superman, and we knew this from the beginning. He escaped from a lab. He was supposed to be grown to maturity, but he didn't make it. He escaped before he was, so he was like a teenager. Then there were 2 other ones, the Cyborg Superman and the Eradicator, who would later become known as the Eradicator, who just claimed to be Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman. And Lois couldn't tell which was which. Like, the Eradicator was like pretty hardcore. Like, he started killing people, and he had kind of different powers than Superman, or like some new powers. And the Cyborg Superman was a freaking cyborg, and he was just kind of cold. Like, he was basically Superman, but was like, kind of more Dr. Manhattan-ish, like, these people and their problems and whatever. I kind of remember some stuff, but some stuff I don't. Bye for now. And spoiler for this old storyline, none of them were really Superman. The Eradicator was like some Kryptonian thing that was sent to, like, kind of protect Superman.
But for anyone interested in that storyline, it's kind of crammed down to fit like an hour and a half, 2 hour span, but they have an animated feature based off that. It's worth a watch.
Yeah, I did see it. It really crams a lot in. There was a villain among the 4 of them, and it was the Cyborg Superman, who was like a guy that had been a previously known character, and it kind of, at the end, it coincides with a big event. They were going to start with Hal Jordan's Green Lantern by the destruction of his city. Superman comes back. He was never really dead. He was just
mostly dead.
Yeah. So they put him in this kind of hibernation chamber so he could soak up powers. And then he was still kind of weakened for a while. Then that led into the story where Hal Jordan became Parallax, like immediately following that. I think at the end of Superman coming back, it was like within the next 3 or 4 issues of Green Lantern, he becomes Parallax, which then led to a minor reboot of the DC universe with 0 Hour. But that is all moot because Superman still had his trunks in this era. They didn't mess with those just yet in his classic costume. They brought him back, and that was within a pretty short span, actually, shorter than I remembered. And so where's Clark Kent been in all this time? They got his shape-shifting cousin, Supergirl at the time, to pretend to be, I think, Clark, actually. I can't remember. And Superman, they're still cleaning up the rubble from Doomsday with the attack with Doomsday and Superman. And Superman comes and finds Clark Kent because that's one of his good buddies who's always writing nice stories about him. And he gets him out, and nobody's the wiser. So then, a few years later, something weird happens with Superman's powers. He becomes Superman Blue. He has electricity powers for a while, and when people are tired of that because they needed to boost sales and bring him back again like they did with the death of Superman, because comic book companies are money-grubbing whores, they bring him back to great sales. If they could only just get somebody to write a good story for Superman. Wait, they did. It was Grant Morrison in 2005. Go read that. When they decided to end the Superman Blue thing, apparently it was just, they kind of just don't address it. So they just, like, he has it in, they're like, you remember when that happened? And he was like, no. And they're like, okay. He's like, I've always worn blue. What are you talking about? And they're like, right. And when they did that, Grant Morrison was writing on Justice League, and he had this whole thing mapped out for regular Superman. Superman classic recipe, if you will. And they were like, nope, we're doing a thing with this Superman. So I think he got like one issue in with regular Superman. And then the next issue of Justice League, Justice League of America, had like weird ass Superman blue. So that was the one time, because it was like this blue and white, electric-y outfit. I think it looked bad. It was mostly drawn bad. It was, there was a lot of writers that not everybody was drawn like Jim Lee in the 90s. Some people just did a slapdash job and got as much done as they could, which is probably like time constraints because they were trying to get as many issues out as possible back then. So technically they did away with the trunks then because they had like this kind of bodysuit. I'm not saying I hate the design. I hate the design for Superman. If it was just a new character, like a Static Shock type electricity-based character, which would have been a black guy, because all new black characters have to have electricity-based powers for some reason. I don't make the rules. Somebody else does, and a long time ago they decided this was going to be the case, except for Spawn. So Superman basically has the same costume, and there was I think that probably rounds us up to Man of Steel. No. When Bryan Singer, famed bad person, tries to... He's not even rebooting it. He's just bringing back the old continuity of Superman. It's basically Superman 5. And that was called Superman Returns. I'm 90% sure. Brandon Routh, I think, did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
The movie's not great. The movie has some problems.
Although I do think Brandon Routh made a better Atom than Superman when he was in the Arrowverse. Yeah. I think it was Quinones from Variant Comics said that the one major change to this costume that he didn't like was that they darkened the red. I am of the opposite opinion. I think that was an okay choice to darken the red but leave the blue like a pretty bright blue. They gave it some textures so it didn't look like, if you got to look close, so it didn't just look like spandex, like what Christopher Reeves was wearing. And he's meant to be the same Christopher Reeves character. So this movie has a weird feel and aesthetic. It feels kind of like the 50s at times. There's a lot of bow ties. There's a lot of old-timey like suits and big cameras in the background. But then there's also like some kid holds up a cell phone or something, I think, at some point. It feels like almost like Legion, like the TV show Legion, where there's like a clashing of eras, like 40, 50, 60, 70 years apart, that there's like this weird merging. Like there's not that many people who wear tweed and bow ties anymore. You put him in this movie and it's gonna give it a weird feel. It either is the mid 2000s and he's been gone however many years, or it's the 40s or some weird ass universe. I don't know. Anyway, my main hang up about his costume in this is the S is too small. It looks like he is wearing Supergirl's outfit. They got them mixed up at the cleaners. And it's just really stretchy, so he was able to get into it. That's it. It's really just not memorable for me. I did go and see it. It's so hard to get this guy right, you know? Like, you want him to be... You want the kids to like him, and you want adults to like him too, and that's why it's hard to get. Like, I remember a friend of mine at the time, it wasn't too long after this came out, was like, he's unstoppable, so how do you have a good story for him? That's why one of his greatest villains is just a regular guy who is a genius and creates these situations for him that put him in impossible scenarios. That's when you get a really good story with what Zack Snyder would go on to do with him, which was... Okay, well, before I say that, I'll go back to when the New 52 started. Every so often, DC will openly do a storyline where they, and this is the comics, and now the movies too, I guess, where they openly reboot the universe, either like in an extreme way or more of a subtle way, and they work that into their storylines, and they've done it more and more. Sometimes it's been done extremely well and helping the comics make sense, and sometimes it's just for like sales. It's just to create a crossover event. Yeah, because I think that's when I started reading DC in earnest, because I had...
The New 52?
Yeah, because previously, I think I've said this before, didn't really have access to a wide range of comics until I moved up here. And that was right about the time they relaunched the New 52. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get in ground floor with these characters. And so I could follow them, you know, week to week, monthly, whatever, where previously I couldn't. So I thought that was just great timing for me to pick up with these characters.
I think for a lot of people too, and they finally brought him, quote unquote, into the 21st century by ditching the trunks for the first time. And they gave his costume like what everybody refers to as like an armored look. I don't know, like
Looks like panel lines.
yeah, like here's the thing, I don't mind that. I know I'm weird about all this. I'm just being honest with the details of these things. I don't mind giving the costume some texture and some look. I know some people have said like it just makes it difficult for when that is the defined look, it makes it difficult to draw month to month like Iron Man or something, whereas like, you know, you can do more with just like a basic costume. You can take liberties with it, I guess, the artist to artist, but just if you have like, this is the costume, this is what we designed it to be. I don't mind the look of basically that. I don't mind the collar. What I mind is, well, we just changed the color of the belt and took away the trunks. It's like saying we took Superman and turned him blonde. He's a new character now. That's lazy. And just to take away the trunks and be like, look at our new costume. What? Bro. Yeah. No. If they had... And this was actually something I planned on bringing up. I love pointing out that the design evolution of Hal Jordan's costume, the classic costume from like, I think like when he was first introduced, it looks like he's wearing like a black bodysuit with a green leotard over it, like a ballerina thingy or a gymnast. And then eventually they took it up from the crotch to the waist. So the green portion is like comes down to a point at about where the belt would be, and then below that is just black, and then the boots. So it looks like he has a top and pants, some sort of, it's a onesie, of course, still, but it gives it the appearance of like a shirt and pants. And Jon Stewart's had some really great designs, some really basic ones where it's just like mostly black. He's got the emblem in the middle, and then like green across the shoulders, and like Guy Gardner is just wearing clothes, or just like pants, gigantic metal belt, and a vest, and like gigantic green boots and gigantic white gloves.
It sounds ridiculous, but it fits his personality.
Like, just go look at classic Guy Gardner, and I was surprised they actually went with the bowl cut for this new movie. I really thought they were going to do just the spiked hair, but maybe next time, Nathan. Maybe you'll get to look cool next time. So I don't really mind... If they were gonna, like, okay, with Magneto, let's take Magneto, for instance. He's had a few different looks, iconically. When everybody is gonna think of Magneto, for the most part, and they do keep coming back to this, they're gonna think of red outfit, purple trunks, purple accents, you know, gloves and boots, and then the cape, and of course the helmet. And it works. I've never minded it. When they did a big redesign and gave him a new white outfit and a black variant of it, they had this design that Cyclops also had, and I think those are the two main. Maybe a couple of other characters had a similar design, just this black, almost like circuit board, like a giant circuit board kind of design is just the best way I can think of. And it didn't have the trunks, but they had all the stuff going on with it. It didn't really need that, and it worked. If they're gonna do that with Superman, they need to do something in the middle. It's just like, they took this thing away. And let me be clear about this. Like, with Batman, the way that we've come to think of him in the modern era works better, and because of a lot of what Tim Burton started with this design, is because he's wearing armor. He's crazy. He's not stupid. He knows he's going to get shot at a lot. He needs to be a little bit bulletproof here and there. So he's either wearing some sort of tactical gear, or in how they referred to it in the Tim Burton's original Batman was like a putty armor, that it's like rubbery but somehow bulletproof. That's not real, but you know, neither is any of the stuff that he has that can do in there either. So we just pretend that can work, and it it does, and it's cool. And it's black. It's just solid black with these other design elements. So it works for Batman. And also they usually like a lot of, even when he is one basic color, either black or gray, there's still something, a lot of artists will draw in lines for some sort of trunks. They've done this with the Fantastic Four over the years, where they're wearing one color, but sometimes they'll just have the trunks drawn in. Like they're still there, they're just the same color. Just saying. I don't have a good firm design for no trunks Superman. I just think there should be some sort of red, either like on the sides, in the middle somewhere. I don't know. If you really just hate that design, come up with something better than just remove them. And he's like a blue version of Batman. I feel like that's dumb. Also, I really don't like how wet he looks in The Man of Steel. He just looks like he gets into a tub at some point. I feel like that's where he keeps his suit. Like, you know, I really like being in the tub with Lois. I wonder how she would like if I wore the Superman suit in here. I feel like that's a deleted scene. They did that, and then he shows up to fight crime, and they're like, you need a towel, buddy? Like, you want to do your super spin to dry off or something? And he's like, no time for that. I have cities to destroy. That Superman's not so smart either. Just saying. I know people love... I know you like Henry Cavill. I don't hate Henry Cavill.
No, I don't blame Henry Cavill for this, because I know he was probably fighting the whole way. Be like, Superman wouldn't do that. Superman
I feel like that too. And of course they have to toe the line. Yeah. There's that famous scene with or the famous interview where Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill are talking, and Henry Cavill's like animatedly, you know, just going on and on about something, and Ben Affleck looks like he wants to kill himself. I feel like that is just, Henry Cavill is just so excited to be doing this that it's like he might fight it, but behind the scenes, but you know, in front of the cameras, he has to toe the line, be the good company man. He is Superman. He is the flagship of, you know, no matter what, how many more people think Batman is cooler, and he might have the better stories and the better interpersonal story arcs. He got to be Superman for a while. And I really feel like he got a raw deal with how he was portrayed. And that's not to say anything about Zack Snyder's directing ability or him as a person. I really don't have... He faced a huge personal tragedy at around that time. I'm not attacking Zack Snyder. I'm one of the people who like Watchmen. There are people who hate what he did to Watchmen. I like it for what it is. I know that it's different from the comics. It's a different adaptation of that. And then some might say, well, then why don't you like Superman? He did basically the same thing. I do think that's a bridge too far. And for it to be the same, I hope that James Gunn is going to be nuanced with each movie that he oversees in this, and that we can have different genre pieces and different character studies per movie, and for them to not have all the same tone like Zack Snyder's universe was going to be.
I think that's the difference with Zack Snyder with his stuff. It's like, yeah, he might have changed Watchmen, but it still had the essence of what that universe was.
Yeah, it was still like a basic you know, like Night Owl had to grapple with what and who he was in the, you know, like he's a sane man in this insane world. Yeah. His best friend went completely crazy, like crazy. They live amongst a god. Yeah. Who's kind of like, he's good, but he's extremely unpredictable.
Yeah. Whereas with Superman, it's like, yeah, for the movies, you kind of have to deviate a little bit from the comics, or else it's just a one-to-one adaptation, and I can see where that would cause problems.
Well, and that's if they could just get a good story to show this character in.
Make a new story, but keep the essence of what he is there.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be about his limitations. I think, like how Grant Morrison saw it, it's, well, how do you feel about God that lives amongst us? Well, he loves you, so, you know? And the one scene, I think I've mentioned this before in an episode that we've done. The scene that Grant Morrison that he wrote, that I feel like sums up Superman is, and I don't remember what issue it is in All-Star Superman. It's where this girl is going to jump off a building or something. She's made it up there, this goth girl. And Superman comes up there, and he took the time to check on what her deal was. She was supposed to see her therapist, and he had she was trying to like get a hold of him and something came up with him. And he goes up there to tell her that and just hugs her. That's Superman. That like, you could have a movie of just that, you know? It doesn't have to be about his limitations and his upper limits or how powerful he is. It could be about just how good he is. That he holds back all the time because he doesn't need to go into his full upper limits to like fight everything or do everything. Nobody's insignificant, and he will do what he can to make the world a better place. And while we have, you know, a Dark Knight who has to make the hard decisions, Superman can pull cats out of trees. And we can have those two in a movie where they're not the same. To have that team up for the years, that's another thing Zack Snyder didn't understand, is when they do team up, it's they're arguing. It's Clark and Cal, or, you know, and Bruce having a fundamental argument because they're not the same person. They're the opposite, but they've found a common ground to be friends. And I think we need that more than ever, especially given the current climate in America in 2024. We need to be able to see that two people from opposing ideologies can sit down and talk things out and find a way to work together and save the day. That's what Grant Morrison sees in Superman. That's how I can see Superman. Superman hasn't had his trunks in a while. Just, you know, we're riding in through to the 2000 teens. Tyler Hoechlin, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, my apologies. Made his debut in, was it Supergirl, I think, which is part of the Flareoverse.
Yeah.
As Superman. And then he got his own show, which was not kind of a leap forward in a Superman mythos, because they have like him and Lois are together and live in a place and live in a normal life other than him being Superman and a reporter, and they have like 2 kids.
Yeah. Well, I think also within the Arrowverse, like Supergirl originally was on a different channel. And so they explained that by saying that it was one of their alternate realities. And she crossed over into ours, like back and forth sometimes.
Yeah,
and so I think that's where the Superman thing with that comes in.
To canonize, like the stuff that they did to like get all those cameos in and canonize like every show ever. Like before the Flash movie did that was pretty cool to have everyone that they had in there, and to get, didn't they get Christopher Reeves to, he was on something before he died in his wheelchair.
Maybe. I think it was,
I don't remember what it was now because I did not research this, but I have this memory of him playing like maybe a villain.
Maybe. No, I think it was, I may be wrong and misremembering because it's been a while since I watched those. But I think Dean Cain might have had a reappearance in one of those.
Did he? I don't remember that. I didn't really watch a lot of these.
I think it's just like maybe an episode, but I don't.
Every time I didn't watch the Arrow or Flash, but every time I see a clip from the Flash, I'm like, man, I gotta watch this show, because it just like those tiny moments that they show, like the coolest scene from that season looks really cool.
Those shows were like my jam for like the longest time. Like that's like the only thing I was watching.
Maybe we should do an explanation or an Arrow episode on that, where you can talk about Arrow and Flash and all the crossover stuff, because some of it actually did look really cool, and I liked some of the redesigns of the characters on there, except they left the trunks off Superman. Except they didn't. They did have, and this is another scene that I feel like encapsulates what Superman could and should be, and why we need this dumb, boring character, this do-gooder, goody-good Boy Scout in 2024, is he like sets a car down. There's this scene, and I saw it on Instagram because I wasn't watching the show, that he sets this car down, and he's wearing the costume, the colors, the too bright a blue, like almost periwinkle, and the weird S, and the trunks, and he looks just like, not just like 1938, but like somewhere like in the 40s or something. And it's meant to replicate the look of the 1938 Superman costume. And he comes up to a kid, and the kid says like, cool costume. And he's like, thanks, my mom made it. And flies away. And I mean, I was like, I think that this guy's got it. This guy understands. And the writers on the show, I think, understand who and what Superman is, which I think is important to have on. You know, you can still have good stories and cool characters, and they gave him 2 kids, so he has to be a dad. And that gets to show another element of it. It doesn't all just have to be super dark and gritty like Batman.
I think that was probably one of my favorite adaptations of Superman is his dynamic with Superboy in Young Justice. Because it starts out like everyone's telling him like, hey, you need to take this kid under your wing. And he's like, why? He's like, he's not like, I didn't create him. Lex did this without my will. He created this. It's like, why is he my responsibility? And then to come full circle in later seasons and they're like one big family. Mm-hmm. And like Superboy goes to like Clark Kent's adopted parents' houses for like dinners and stuff. And it's so just to see that evolution, I think was.
Yeah, I didn't include what I had planned here to talk about, basically. Did not include Young Justice, but Young Justice has been one of the best things that DC put out, so much so, like bringing back X-Men after so long. They actually got to bring it back and finish it. So it's done, right?
Yeah.
Like they brought it back just long enough to give it a bit of an ending.
I think so.
I watched as much of that as I could when it was like just on Saturday mornings. I didn't keep up with it religiously and would miss some, so I've always meant to go back and just watch the whole thing because I actually really like that show. What they did with Aqualad, Ms. Martian, and all the like it got pretty dark in there too with what I think they did with Arsenal. With Speed, what they did in the comics. We should talk about physique a little bit, because, like, I think a lot of people looked at, from Henry Cavill to Tyler Hoechlin, like, this guy's super small, which I think they drew attention to in that when they were doing the Crisis event on the Flash and Arrow stuff, when he sees, like, the guy, now I can't think of it, the guy who played him on Smallville, what's his name? And he's like a monster. He's, like, huge. And I'm gonna look it up because that makes me mad. And we're editing. Tom Welling. So they see Tom Welling and they look at Tyler Hoechlin and they're like, that's you? He's like huge. He doesn't, you could make the case that like Superman could be any size because he's like Kryptonian or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
because his powers don't come from his muscle.
Like, girth, yeah. So I think having a guy that looks like a normal guy, it lends itself back to Christopher Reeves, who just was the best actor and face to portray Superman at the time. Like George Reeves, is like a larger, stout man, an absolute unit, if you will. But I think Tyler's got a good look. I think he's got a good demeanor. From all I've seen, plays the character very well, and some of the stuff on there looks really cool. I just do not have the time to watch every TV show that comes my way. I'm still waiting on us to do that Doom Patrol one. Keep dropping hints about that Doom Patrol episode. It's coming. But Tyler's actual uniform that he wears in the show, like, I actually think it's better than Henry Cavill's, but the collar's a little, like, the collar of the suit, like, from what I've seen, it's like a little low. I like a big cape, and just if the collar was like up closer to the neck. I don't want to be seeing somebody's like wax line on their chest, like, that's weird to me. And like, I don't know, I'm super particular about this costume and getting it just the right.
I think that's kind of a good point to lead in to the DCCU, is those shows, whether their quality, especially in later seasons, you could argue, and I know a lot of people do,
that it did.
But those lower budget TV shows should not be better than your movies. Yeah. It's like, if you got a bigger production, bigger actors, and this behind it, it should be better. So that's what I'm hoping with James Gunn.
James Gunn's he just loves comic books, action movies. I feel like he loves everything I do, and the classic looks of these. So that'll bring us up to the very little we have seen from the new movie, which he cleverly is allowing to be filmed up a little north of us in Cleveland, Ohio, just out in the open. He's just waving to people, taking videos and cameras and leaking them online. They're not leaking them. He's doing this on purpose. It's free publicity. Yeah. And he knows that he knows this one thing from personal history. There's no such thing as bad press. There are people creating buzz around your product. And when you deliver when they've talked shit about it for a year and then you deliver a good thing and then it blows everybody's expectations out of the water because their expectations are set low. Whether they're set low, they're hoping for high, they're seeing through this bullshit and knowing that it's going to be better than even what it looks like because this is somebody's like fuzzy iPhone photos or videos. That's not what it's going to be. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
I am hoping that it's going to be really good.
That's where I'm at.
And just to say, growing up, I was more a Marvel fan too. I didn't agree with you on that earlier. I think we've talked about this at length in so many other of our episodes. I was a huge Marvel fan too. Magneto is still like my top character of all time. Like, I still think you start with DC and graduate to Marvel. Like, DC's for younger people and then Marvel's for adults. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And people can also disagree with that and see it as the opposite at times.
DC focuses on the alter ego, where Marvel is just as much the person behind it.
Yeah.
So you got those nuances. But as far as this goes, will this be enough to kick off the DCCU? Will this save it? I don't know. But I think they have the best possible chance right now. Unless there is a lot of studio or producer interference.
Which, I mean, everyone is in agreement. I think that one of the best trilogy, maybe the best actual trilogy of films from Marvel is Guardians.
Yeah.
It was the one movie that was the outlier in the beginning. It was like you had Thor, Captain America, Iron Man. They're building to the Avengers. And then they toss in Guardians of the Galaxy, something nobody's heard of, nobody gives a about, and nobody wanted. And then it's crazy good and blows everybody's expectations and then, makes a lot of money. And then people are like, okay, Feige knows what he's doing. He knows who to get to make the things he wants to happen.
Because James Gunn is a huge comic book fan. And he puts his research in doing these and has a good enough writing chops to be able to adapt these characters. I think that's why his version of Suicide Squad and the subsequent Peacemaker spinoff did so well, is because he went through, read all the comics beforehand, then's like, okay, these are ridiculous characters. So let's pick and choose the best parts of that to make the ridiculous movie work properly.
And there's no reason why it can't. That ridiculousness, he just uses that to his advantage and makes it the comedy aspect that gives you the levity you need to have a balanced film.
And I think that's what the other writers and whoever the powers that be are need to understand. Yes, those are funny, and we all love them for that. But that's because it fits in this scenario. Not everything has to be ham-fisted into those situations. Let the characters be what the characters need to be when they need to be it. So don't force the comedy when you need the drama, like in the last Thor movie.
Right, yeah. It just became a pure comedy.
Yeah. So it's like the opposite of what we talked about with Nolan's Dark Knight. It's like making things dark just to be different doesn't always work. And being funny just because it worked one time doesn't mean you always have to be funny.
Yeah. As opposed to the movie just Thor 3, Ragnarok. That was Ragnarok. Yeah. That one was like perfect. It was, they had just the right balance and the humor was good because I don't think they were forcing it. They just had the script and went with it. Whereas like I think in Thor 4, they said that worked last time. Let's do it, but too much.
Yeah.
It's like when you're like, I want some spicy mustard on my burger. And then the chef says, you like spicy mustard, huh? I'll just put the whole bottle. And you're like, oh, too much. Yeah. Too much. I'm going to throw it on the floor.
It's like I wanted to laugh, not blow out my sphincter, but...
Oh. So, all right. So this recently, and this is part of the reason why I had already wanted to talk about Superman because it's boring. Because that's what everybody says. But it's really, when you get the right writer and you get given this character, you have to do stories that are good and relevant. So when James said we're going to do Superman first and we're not going to do an origin story, it's going to be, there's going to be, he mentioned a lot of characters that are going to be in it. I was like, okay, this is going to be like the launching pad. He's going to use it as a launching pad. And it's not going to be necessarily a Superman story. It's going to be a DC story that Superman is at the core of, like maybe Civil War. Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying it's going to be like a Civil War scenario with like how Captain America Civil War was, but that Captain America was not necessarily the star of Captain America Civil War. That was an ensemble piece, and there was a lot of the main characters by that point that were in there. That's going to be what this is going to feel like, which is what I always said they should do. They should do the opposite of what Marvel did. Start with a Justice League that is preformed, and then go out from there and do the individual movies. This is the best hope for that.
Yeah, I agree. Because even to non-comic book fans, I think Superman is so well known. You don't need to do an origin story every reboot. No. We all know who Superman is.
Same with Batman. So we get our first official image, and it's not Regal. I think he almost could have had him. It could have been that image of that was the cover of the Grant Morrison book, where Superman's sitting on a cloud, just kind of looking back at you, like grinning, like, I just love this place. I love being me, and I love doing what I do. And if you can think about that, but the opposite of that, not him hating himself and what he has to do, but like getting, lacing up his boots, and then Alf in the background from the window is some crazy thing happening in the sky, and he's like, welp, here we go again. And he looks resolute but calm, and this is me personally, yet again, I think you can see from this nuanced conversation, I do not love everything that has ever been done with Superman. I do not love how everyone has handled him over the years, or the costuming, or the stories, or what have you. But when you get it right, I think it is a great character vehicle for some great stories. And there is a reason why he's nearly 100 years old, is because he's never gone out of fashion, not completely, and he can always remain relevant to do a character study on something like this. It is not about the power, it is about the man, and what we should all aspire to be more like, just a person who does the right thing. Does he always? No, but he tries, and because he does have a choice. He could rule the world if he wanted. He's that powerful. He chooses just to help people. So he's sitting here, and he's about to do just that. You can kind of see into the crotch a little bit that there's some red, but people did not think of it as confirmed, because you could not see it for sure. I thought there's enough of it there that like trunks are confirmed. I was worried that he was going to have more of the Grant Morrison, the Frank Quietly, who drew the Grant Morrison comics, the shorter cape, because I had seen something, I thought maybe it was test footage or I'm not sure what it was, because it looked just like that. I was going to be content with that, but we get a nice big full cape when we do get to see that. Yellow S on the back. The S is streamlined. They took something from the modern look where it's almost just like a zag, not even like a zigzag, it's just like a line across. The extremely modern S from, borrowing from around the new 52-ish era. I don't know exactly when it's probably not a 1-to-1, but I think that's around the era they took that from. And everyone's saying that they made it look like Guardians, and I guess they're referring to the most recent Guardians movie where they had like jumpsuits or some sort of uniform costume. I think if you're looking at Superman and the evolution here, I think you could clearly draw a line from the new 52, like designy armory look to Guardians than to this Superman, and say like, well, he liked the look so much he borrowed from Superman and then is borrowing from himself in 3D in live action. Maybe. I don't know. I can see people are like, James Gunn did Guardians. That's what Guardians looked like last. That's what Superman looks like kind of now. And I've seen some side by side where I can see where they would say that. But I also think if you put the new 52 Superman next to this, it's like, well, that's really why he did it, is because they'd borrowed that. He just put the trunks back on. And here's the greatest part about this. They got the trunks right. Finally. If you're gonna have trunks, get them right. Don't make it look like a Speedo. You want a nice boxer brief look. And it breaks up the costume. It's not like you're like in the sea of blue in Henry Cavill. You're like, where are my eyes supposed to land? I keep going to the bad place that I'm not supposed to. In this, it looks just right. My eyes are still going to the bad place, but I don't care, because those trunks are glorious. It looks just right. The colors are nice and bright. You're not gonna miss this guy up in the sky. I will patiently await this. It's another year out. I think I don't really have too many theories. It looks crazy that we're getting like Hot Girl, Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner's been seen, some other like bad guys that people have, they're like all black. People have some mixed theories about. People are getting up in arms. People are getting so upset about this. And that's, you know what? I like that too, because it shows how much people care. And when he gets it right, they're going to go and they're going to eat their words, and they're gonna say, like, they're gonna weep openly in the film and say, like, this is what we've been waiting for. This is what we've needed. When Marvel first started laying out their films, it was, you know, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America. I was going to see them. I wanted to see what they were building. I was finally getting what I'd wanted since I was a kid, like really good comic book movies from the line, you know, Marvel comics that I'd wanted. We'd had some good ones from DC, but even then, not like, some of them were really bad. And when Captain America was rolling out, I wasn't like this guy who was like, I will see all of these films. I didn't care. I did go to see it because I went to the movies all the time. I go to see Captain America, but I was like, you know, and here's what I learned. Any character that you think is boring, give it to a good writer and let them liven it up, because you can have a good story. Anything can be a good story.
Yeah.
Anything can be a good story if you get the right writer. And that's what I discovered then. And I was well into my adult years. I was just becoming cynical. And I didn't like that about myself. And looking at various things like a Captain America, like a Superman, I came to realize that it is about the character. It is not about the explosions or the powers. It is about what you do when nobody's looking. So I await this movie. I hope that it reignites DC. I do prefer Marvel still. But here's the thing. I don't hate DC. I think it would be amazing to be in a Renaissance era of cinema and comic book films at the same time.
Yeah.
Where we can have good movies from both. And we can have a distinguished competition.
Yeah, I think that's what they need. I think they need the competition. Because when DC first tried this, I feel like they were trying to rest on the laurels that Marvel had created. And then Marvel got to a point where they're like, we're not the underdog anymore. Just throw it out there. And so I think this competition from both sides is good for everybody.
Marvel kind of drank their own Kool-Aid and started doing, you know, they've done badly now. They've dipped into murky territory where some of the films aren't doing as well. They're relying too much on, appealing to a younger audience, like a TikToker crowd. I'm not sure really what it is that they're doing. They're, you know, like the last Thor movie they had some bad ideas for it and went totally into a comedy territory that didn't work. And that film should have been 2 films. That's a whole different conversation, but whatever. I don't think it was a bad idea to do as a film. I just think they executed it terribly because they rushed her being sick and getting cancer and then dying all in one film. That should have been like a long storyline that could have culminated in something that actually meant something. But anyway, yeah, what a surprise it would have been if she hadn't died. Yeah. At the end and they kept it going. But I really feel like once they see like, we need to bring the Russo brothers back to write us and direct us some good films and get us back on track, which they are doing some heavy reevaluating by canceling a lot of projects and reformulating a lot of projects and scaling back on what their release schedule is. We can debate endlessly on where they went wrong and what they could do to do better, but seeing DC release some good films might give them a swift kick in the ass to get to it faster. So I wish them both luck. I just want good films. Yeah. Good stories and good films. And so this new Superman, Cornsweet? Is that his name? I can't remember what his name is. The new actor, I think he looks good. I think he looks the part. I don't know if the broccoli hair as Clark Kent is going to be good. It kind of reminds me a little of the new cartoon, the anime-ish cartoon that's out right now. So maybe those photos have been bad too. And I was hypercritical of people being hypercritical about a photo taken out of context and not seeing it on screen. So I patiently await to see what James Gunn does with this. I hope it's good. And I will see you there on opening night, and then we will have an emergency session.
And with that, you think that's a good place to wrap up?
For sure.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Are you guys excited? Do you think that James Gunn can reunite the DCU? What are your thoughts on Superman as a whole? If you've made it with us this far, thank you. Be sure to like and subscribe, really helps us out. And follow us on our social media. Maybe one day we'll post more on those, but they are there. We'll leave links in the comments. We are on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, see ya.